he disowned his son. He went out there in the open. And I thought, well, hang on a second. You might have that within your own family. Do you want to wash your dirty linen in public? Do you want to be telling the world, my son is a disgrace? It's 90 minutes out of your day. Why can't you put 100% effort into it?
What made you feel guilty?
I don't know. I just used to feel if you hurt your opponent, you're sending the message, I'm capable of doing damage to you.
Frank, since we last talked, you've been all over the world. Tell me what's been happening.
I've been lucky. People have recognised the kind of stuff I'm trying to do in terms of coaching, and I've been invited so many places to do these coaching seminars. But in addition to that, Turki Al-Sheikh invited me to the Ring Magazine Awards in January in London, which is, it's like the Oscars of boxing, and you're meeting and interviewing. I took the chance for my social media channels to interview 2 or 3 people, and it was a fantastic occasion. And the thing I liked about it was so well organised, and it was concise. It was neat. It didn't go on for hours and hours and hours. So I had that, and then when I was I met Turki Al-Sheikh there. I didn't know the guy standing next to him when I was talking until I saw the video later. And it was Canelo Alvarez who was standing there.
Standing right next to you.
And he's a smaller guy than I really thought. In terms of, I know he's only about my height, 5'7", but he was also kind of very slim. So yeah, we did that. And then I was at my table having dinner when one of his closest aides, Turki Al-Sheikh's closest aides, came over and said, Turki would like you to be at the Beterbiev Bivol fight in Riyadh in February. Will you come? Try and stop me. So that was great. And I've been at Paris a couple of times, seminars, and yeah, great fun. I'm loving it.
That's brilliant. I mean, Turki Al-Sheikh has done so much for boxing. He's making the fights happen. Frank, what do you think would have happened? Where would boxing be right now if he hadn't got involved and put all this money into the sport?
Well, I think boxing was kind of dying on its backside until he came along, right? Because you're right. Let's look at Terence Crawford against Errol Spence. That fight going back a couple of years, they were talking over social media for about 18 months or 2 years about what they were going to do to each other, but nothing was happening. Where were the promoters when you need them? We needed somebody to step in there and say, let's make this fight happen. Eventually it did. And I think, boxing was struggling in terms of popularity. Of course, Turki Al-Sheikh comes along and he kind of sees an opportunity because Saudi Arabian money, it's kind of endless, a bottomless pit of American dollars. And he said, yeah, let's get these fights happening. Not only that, they're happening every other week. I mean, it's fantastic what he's doing.
Yeah.
And then he's taken another step and he's seen the way things are operating in terms of boxing and the promoters. And he's been thinking, why do I need these guys? Why do I need Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren? Well, maybe he does a little bit. But now that he's teamed up with Dana White of the UFC organization, he can see there is another better route for him to take. Probably save Saudi a heap of billions of dollars as well. But there you are. He's changed the landscape of professional boxing in the world.
He seems to me to be a boxing guy. Like, not just that he's doing a job. He seems to enjoy the boxing. You can see him ringside, and he seems to be like really getting into a good fight. I saw him at the Benn-Eubank, and he seemed to be really enjoying that fight. He's
that type of guy. He is a boxing fan. You could tell it. He's totally immersed. And whereas somebody like that normally would be in awe of these boxers, maybe he is, I don't know, but he doesn't appear to be. What we're finding now is these boxers are in awe of him because he's the guy who pulls the strings. So you've got to keep in with the boss, as it were. And he's guiding boxing at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, down the proper path. And I think that's brilliant.
I mean, I just mentioned there that he was ringside at the Benn-Eubank fight, which we're in the aftermath week of that right now. What a contest, Frank. What did you make of all that?
Well, it was all hype, of course. It's the most hyped fight in UK boxing history. And I don't buy into all that stuff,
I do.
Do you? Right. Well, I don't. In fact, I dislike it intensely. But
Okay.
I don't like to see guys behaving the way they did on occasion. So if we put that to one side, I'm thinking beforehand, okay, it's going to be a massive weight difference. I thought, and I said actually on a video or two, on a podcast or two, that I thought Eubank would win because he was a superior boxer. He had the ability to spoil, and that's a talent in itself. If you're being hassled, if you're being at the end of a guy who's terribly aggressive, you can grab, you can hold, you can spoil, you can slow the tempo of the fight to the pace that you want. And then as the weeks went on and I read and saw more about his weight loss, I changed my mind. I thought, well, if Ben is strong and puts him under pressure for 12 rounds, what are the chances that Eubank might actually wilt in the later rounds because of the weight loss difficulty? But I was wrong.
Well, I mean, throughout the fight, Eubank is saying to him, "You're weak." He keeps saying, "You're weak, you're weak." He was not saying that in the last round of that fight. He was. It looked to me like both of them were ready to go at any minute. I thought.
I agree. They gave it everything. I mean, it was not one of the best fights I've ever seen. And despite what we've said and what we've heard post-fight, but mainly from Eddie Hearn, because he's an interest in this, but he's bigged it up, as being a fantastic fight and wonderful boxers and all that. I still think, having looked at them, studied them, watched the fight, I enjoyed it. But they are nowhere near world championship level.
No, that wasn't Beterbiev Bivol.
No.
But and there was nothing on the line in this fight other than pride.
Yeah.
Your family name was on the line. And I think what was sold and what was well promoted was the backstory of the whole thing, the father-son relationship and all of that. And do you think that actually draws the public in because they then have this kind of almost personal connection with the fighters? They understand they have their own family troubles and they're watching it on TV and there's something playing out there.
That's a good point. And I think they certainly saw that mainly with the Eubanks, and we've had a constant stream of social media posts from Eubank Senior, not only telling us how great he is, still is, but how he disowned his son. He went out there in the open, and I thought, well, hang on a second. You might have that within your own family. Do you want to wash your dirty linen in public? Do you want to be telling the world, my son is a disgrace, he shouldn't be taking this fight? And all the while, did he know that he was going to be at the fight?
I think he probably did.
I think he did.
But I saw him standing there with Michael Watson when he started crying, and I believe that was real. I don't think that was made up, but in the back of his mind, I think he knew he was always going to support his son.
I think you're right. It was like the build-up, part of the build-up, and then, people are still talking right up until they came into the arena. They're talking about, it wouldn't have been great if Eubank Senior had been there, or they don't get on. How will that affect the son? All that stuff. And then, of course, he steps out the car along with his son to enter the arena, to enter the Tottenham Hotspur football ground. I thought, oh, here
that was
we
drama,
go.
That.
Drama. It was all kind of WWE stuff, and it's not boxing. But listen, if people enjoy that side of it, that's great. And if they find it entertaining, that's great. As a purist, it didn't impress me one bit.
I think this is why it maybe reaches the wider public because they know about the fighters, whereas they don't know often much about fighters unless there is some kind of drama that's in the public sphere.
Yeah, that's true. And what we found that in recent, more so in recent years, or maybe even since Muhammad Ali's, let's say, we've seen this kind of hype going on again and again, borrowed from WWE, of course. And of course, I don't know why people buy into that, for goodness sake, but they do, and they enjoy it. That's fine. But more and more, so the people are listening, they're watching. Social media has spread this all over the place. So every day, if you put on whatever, social media channel you choose to watch, you're going to see something about this fight, or about the fighters, about their personal lives, about what's going on in the background, their training camps, all that. So that's all good for the promotion and for the fight and for these guys making £7 million each. That's great. So there is a lot to be said for it. But, if you're cynical like me, you hardly ever buy into that. But listen, if people like it, terrific.
I've seen images in the past of massive stadiums going way back to, I think, Jack Dempsey, Jack Johnson, people, Marciano, these people. How did they fill stadiums? Why were the public so engaged with them back then?
You're going back to the halcyon days of boxing, particularly in America, but even in the UK. I mean, they were filling Haringey Arena and places like that in the 50s and 60s. But in America, if you look at it, was all about newspapers. So all the leading newspapers of the day would have their boxing writers. They knew what they were doing. They knew what they were talking about. And also the TV channels of the day would cover the boxer and the training camp and so on. And these were magical figures for the American public, mainly. Marciano and Joe Louis, Jack Dempsey. But you were reading about these people all the time. And the history of these guys is fantastic. How they got into boxing, how they managed their careers and so on, and people being ripped off and people losing all their money. I mean, look at the great Sugar Ray Robinson. He ended up virtually penniless because he had made bad investments. He was badly advised. He had an entourage everywhere he went. Even like you, Mike, he even brought his barber to London where he came to fight Randolph Turpin. Yeah. The barber was part of a 12-person entourage. Yeah. Now, he didn't have a social media channel like you, YouTube, the 1 Minute Barber, but there you are.
Thank you for the plug.
But there you are. Robinson had this great entourage and a wonderful athlete. And these guys would fill. I mean, let's get closer to home. Peter Keenan, right? People, if you mention his name, they say, well, who was Peter Keenan? He was a terrific guy. He was the British, Commonwealth and European bantamweight champion from Glasgow. Peter was semi-literate, but he became a big promoter in Scotland in the 1960s and 70s. But listen to this. He was boxing at places like Cathkin Park, the old home of Thurlanich Football Club, and Firhill, the home of Partick Thistle. Right? This was no TV or anything like that. He was filling it with 30,000 people there every time. And that's where he became promoter while he was still fighting. You weren't allowed to do that in those days. The manager had to have a license, the promoter had a license. There was no kind of cross-pollination, and the fighter did his job. But when he fought Jake Tooley for the Commonwealth title in about 1957 or thereabouts, he went to the promoter and said, how are the tickets going? Well, they're not going well, So Keenan started to take over the promotion, as it were, took all the PR and the newspaper stuff, pushed it hard, and he, in fact, became unofficially the promoter. And so he was going back to his seat in between rounds. And what was he doing? He was listening to his trainer, but he was counting the number of seats virtually. Have we filled this place tonight? And he's going around looking about.
That's a bit of multitasking.
It's brilliant. and so that's how boxing's changed. These people you talk about filled, 100,000 people to see Jack Dempsey boxing, Gene Tunney and Jack Johnson in Havana and so on.
Frank, I was obsessed with all those old fighters when I was boxing. I used to love, especially Rocky Marciano. I used to always try and go and find footage of Marciano or Ali. I put it in slow motion, and I want to watch what they were doing. And Marciano, what power he delivered! And I was always trying to hit the bag like Marciano, and I don't know whether it was a problem for me in my own amateur boxing, but I always had hand injuries. And you watch Marciano, he would hit the bag so hard. Ali as well, you know, or Foreman, they would hit the bag so hard.
They all did.
Yeah.
They all did.
I never got away with it. I was forever getting like hand injuries, frustrating problems.
Well, of course, the big thing about, and I hammer on about this, the first thing we learned when we went into a boxing gym for the first time was how to make a fist, how to clench your fist, right? By wrapping your thumb right over the fist. Nowadays, young kids can't do that. I mean, I've said to young boxers, you know, make a fist, and they go like this, and they don't know what to do. But that was the way you were taught, right? And then that means, of course, you punch with the knuckle part of the glove. So none of this stuff about the bottom part of the fingers, which is painful. But it might be, you know, people are susceptible to injuries. Of course they are. You know, not everybody's the same. But when you look at Marciano, for goodness sake, and if you picture yourself in against Marciano, like Jazzy Joe Walcott and Archie Moore and Roland Lastarza. I mean, he fought Roland Lastarza, who was a tall, much taller than Marciano. Well, Marciano was only 5'10", about 14 and a half stone. And Roland Lastarza went in there, and he was a kind of classic boxer. Good jab, you know, good cross, basics, really good. Marciano was up against it in terms of skill and technique. But he kept hitting Lastarza on the arms, and he beat Lastarza on points, I think it was, over 15 rounds. And at the end of it, Lastarza reported that he had 13 burst blood vessels in his arms. That's the power you're talking about, Mike.
How do you develop it? So how can a young fighter, like, let's say, go back, how could I have developed the power of Marciano? What was he doing that gave him that?
Well, primarily heavy bag stuff. But actually, to be honest with you, I think you're born with this, right? There are people who cannot knock out another boxer. And in fact, in the amateurs, that's quite rare to see a knockout, you know. But what you aim to do was at least hurt them. Right, and I've made this in some videos. I've said this. You know, you've got to hurt your opponent, and people have thrown up their arms and saying, "Well, that's terrible," you know. But that's why you're there. If you hurt your opponent, you're sending the message. You know, I'm capable of doing damage to you. I'm capable of making you think that I'm a dangerous person to be in the ring with, and that's a psychological battle you get into. You know, you start playing these little games, but the power punching is partly you're born with it, but you can learn. And this is the thing, you know, lots of young boxers punch with the arm and not with the body, not with the shoulder, and not with the sway of the hip, and not with, you know, not with the swivel and turning into the punch and shortening the punch. Marciano, I mean, he was the greatest short puncher of all time, possibly. And if you look at him winning the world title against Jersey Joe Walcott with that Susie Q, as he called it, the right cross that travelled about 9 inches, and you think, where did that come from? That sheer power.
That has to be one of the most famous photos of a punch I've ever seen. I mean, you see it all the time.
Yeah. And what you got to remember is Jersey Joe Walcott was one of the toughest ever heavyweight champions. He could punch. And if you look at the fight and the second fight as well, the exchange of blows between those two fighters, you're closing your eyes and thinking, how did they do that? How did they do that? My admiration for Marciano also spreads to the fact that after 49 undefeated contests, he called it a day. And I thought, that's the mark of a champion. He doesn't see the need to continue. Why would I? I've got plenty of money. I have a nice life. I have everything I need. I've got a great family.
You know, I read when he died,
Yeah.
he died in a plane crash. He had so much money and nobody knew where it was.
Really?
All his money was squirreled away in all these different places. People owed him money and they didn't want to own up to it. But apparently he never spent a penny after he was like the after he retired. He expected everybody to pay for him everywhere he went.
Really?
He was a real miser, apparently. I'm not. I know he was a great champion, but they say that he had money hidden everywhere.
Sure.
Marciano used to squirrel it away in different places. And
Well, I guess that what you say about expecting people to pay for it. That's probably not unusual when you get to that level. If you're invited to places, you wouldn't expect to put your hand in your pocket, but. I didn't know that.
I think when you've achieved something like that, you almost get the keys to the city of boxing, you know. And if you go to people want to see you at events.
Yeah.
I mean, Frank Bruno, he does a lot of events. I know that, and he's so popular. Everybody loves him.
I know.
And
why do they love him?
on
Because he's a likable guy. And what we must always remember, and it's not quite the same now, but the heavyweight champion of the world was the biggest sports prize ever, right? He was the number one guy in world sport, the heavyweight champion of the world. Now, it's not, things have changed. So you don't look at heavyweight champions in that way at the moment. And that's one of the changes in boxing.
Yeah. Speaking of the heavyweight division right now, what about the current crop? Like, we have Usyk. There's Daniel Dubois coming up, who's exciting. Joshua's still in the mix, I think. Tyson Fury, will he come back? There's a lot of questions in the heavyweight division. What do you think of the lay of the land there, Frank, right now?
Well, the lay of the land is that Usyk is head and shoulders above everybody in terms of technique and skill. He's not the biggest puncher in the world, but he's a punishing puncher. He does damage. But more than that, he's a gentleman. He's a proper champion in every way, and he's the kind of guy it should be the role model for boxing, and not some of the others. I mean, if you look at the carry-on the other day with Dubois and Dubois' father at the press conference with Usyk, you begin to think, why doesn't somebody step in? And this is what I'd love to see from Turki Al-Sheikh, to step in. He's not going to do it, but I'd love to see him stepping in and saying, look, guys, if you're going to be in my promotion, you don't behave like morons. Because, let's face it, the moronic behaviour in boxing, at press conferences, at weigh-ins and all that, which never existed before. People would weigh in, they would shake each other by the hand and say, good luck tonight. And they would go on their way. But now it's all about in your face. And the other thing that gets me is the promoter is always in the picture. Why? What's he got to do with it?
They want to be the star of the show too.
They do. I mean, guys like Eddie Hearn, not so much Frank Warren. Frank Warren's longer in the tooth, and he knows the game inside out. But Eddie Hearn, I feel like saying, he's incredibly great in the media, but he should take a step back out of the limelight and let his boxers take centre stage. It's not about the promoters. It's about the guys in the ring who are putting their lives in danger sometimes.
Speaking of the way that boxers act in front of the camera, I was actually really impressed with Conor Benn in the post-fight press conference. I don't know if you saw it, but he was very gracious in defeat.
Yeah.
They asked him about Eubank, and he said, look, I'm really happy that his father was there. I'm happy that those two have got together. And to say things like that about someone who's put an egg in your face and you've just lost, there was that painful defeat for him as well. I thought that showed great humility. Whether that continues for the second fight, I don't know.
Well, there you are. How can a person be like that? And yet, if you were to interview him the day before the fight, he'd be the exact opposite. He'd be calling Eubank Jr. every name under the sun. and he'd be using offensive language. He would be trying to intimidate his opponent. And yet there we are after the fight. And good on him. You know,
Frank, great question for you then in that case, because how many times have you seen that in boxing? What is it about two men having a fight in a boxing ring that just levels the disrespect? Like all of a sudden they have at the end of a fight, there's respect there all of a sudden.
I don't understand it. Why isn't there respect there? Or if it is before the fight, if there's respect before the fight, why don't they let us know about it? Why don't they let their opponent know that they respect them? Why is it all about kind of profanity and downgrading their opponent in such a way, and demeaning their opponent in such a way that it's offensive? And it's offensive to watch for someone like me who grew up in a different era and saw these great fighters, you know, guys that Conor Benn and Chris Eubank and many, many others couldn't even dream of tying their laces. These guys did it with, you know, when you look at the fights, for example, with Sugar Ray Robinson, I go back to him, but you look at the four great middleweights, Sugar Ray Leonard, Hagler, Duran, and Thomas Hearns. You didn't get all that with them. You know, they had respect. There is no need to carry on the way some of the boxers today carry on. So if the respect is there after the fight and they embrace and they say, well done, good fight, you deserve to win, or whatever they say, why can't it be there beforehand? I just don't get it. Well, I do. It's all about selling tickets.
I noticed that they didn't embrace after the fight.
No,
there was no congratulations on either part, but there
Yeah.
was mutual respect. Eubank had said he was surprised by Ben, and Ben didn't have a bad word to say afterwards, which I thought was great. But yeah, it's just one of those things. Is suddenly it's like it's a clearing of the air when there's a big fight like that. The tension's gone. I wonder if like the coaches are involved, because the coach has to tell you you're better than that man.
Yeah.
You know, they must get into your head that you're better. And how much do they believe their own hype and they get pumped up by it and things are said?
Somebody asked me that recently about, I think it was Andy Lee, who was the trainer for Conor Benn. Would he steady him up? You know, would he tell him, you know, just cool your jets here and that's a possibility. But it's not Andy Lee's responsibility. Of course he has an interest and he's on the payroll and all that kind of stuff. But that is probably the responsibility maybe of Nigel Benn to say to his son, come on, you know. But Nigel Benn didn't behave all that well. And certainly, you know, in the lead up to the fight, although he was less vociferous than Mr. Eubank Sr., who had plenty to say. But the thing about it's the manager's job, in my view. The manager ought to step in and say, right, this is the way I want you to behave. You know, it's blooming hard to control these people, though. And I've seen it, you know, in amateur boxing now, where you get guys in the changing room and they're strolling about with their headphones on, listening to music, and they're staring out their opponent and all that, trying to intimidate them and so on. That's in the amateur game. So where are they learning that? I think we know where they're learning that from.
Well, right, so we're talking grassroots boxing.
Yeah.
Okay, and I had a look on your Instagram, Frank, and some of the names that are following you now, and I know it's not what you're looking for, but you've got Tyson Fury, you've got Terence Crawford, Conor McGregor, Israel Adesanya, he's following you as well, Alexander Usyk.
Yes.
All these guys started at a grassroots level and became great fighters. What is it that cuts them apart? What is it that separates you at grassroots level? What could a young boxer do at grassroots level to make them a great one day?
Well, he could work hard and he needs to learn the basics, the fundamentals. And that's fine. If you learn that, you know, people think, oh, I could do that, you know, in a couple of training sessions or even, you know, a couple of hours. And they think, oh, I know how to throw a jab now or a cross or whatever. But the fact is, every time you go into the gym, you need to practice over and over again. because it then goes into your psyche. It goes into your DNA. It becomes part of you, and it becomes instinctive. And I think that's the key thing in boxing. You need to be, I get loads of questions when I do seminars and even comments on social media saying, if I show a particular punch or a move, you get the naysayers saying, yeah, but what if, And if you live your life with a what if mentality, you're never going to do anything. So when you go into boxing, if you want to throw a cross or a hook and you're prepared and you've got the distance and it's the right thing because your instinct tells you that and your experience tells you that, and you throw it and it lands, that's fine. If it doesn't land and you're caught, you can't think, I shouldn't do that again. What you do is you break it down and think, well, I won't make that mistake again. Thing about kids nowadays, and I see this in lots of gyms, they don't work hard enough. And I keep telling them, you have 90 minutes or whatever in the gym. It's 90 minutes out of your day. Why can't you put 100% effort into it? Now, the other thing is, and this is an argument that kind of wells up every time when I talk about this subject, is I don't think many young boxers are taught the fundamentals. Now, there are coaches and there are teachers. I consider myself a teacher or a trainer, like an old-style trainer. Why do we do this? If you explain to kids, this is the way you do it, and this is why you do it this way, then, you get a better understanding of it. They do. I think we need to get back to the fundamentals and show kids you're looking at maybe half a dozen punches that they need in their repertoire, and they need to practice it over and over again. They need to take it into sparring when they think they're ready, and they need to perfect it. And then it goes into their instinctive behaviour when it comes the time when they're going to need to throw a hook or a counter punch or a jab or whatever. It's there. They don't even have to think about it. It comes out instinctively.
Yeah. Along the way, they're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
You can't go out in the rain and avoid all the drops, right? And then maybe they get somewhere, their body's going to be under stress. They're going to be, mentally broken along the way. It's going to be extremely hard the better you get. How do you get past those things, Frank? How do you get past that kind of stress on your body and your mind?
A great question. It's one I've thought about a lot, Mike, because what you get with young boxers going into their first few contests, or however long it takes, they need to get across a hurdle, and that hurdle is fear, right? Or you could call it apprehension. And it's the what if question again. What if? And I see it all the time, especially with boxers who want to throw a cross, but they're going to, they're invariably short with it because of that apprehension. They're almost pulling back the punch before it gets out there, And so once you get them over that hurdle of fear that they're going to be hurt, then that's ditched. That kind of thinking is ditched. You go in there and you're more confident, not arrogant, but you're more confident. And you're able to say, well, I can take a punch. Now, you never want to find out if you've got a good chin or not, but inevitably you are going to find that out if you've got a good chin. We've all been there when you've done you've made a mistake or whatever, or the guy's been better than you, and you take a really good one on the chin or in the body, mainly on the chin. That's why I'm kind of almost obsessive about teaching young boxers how to guard their chin. You take one on the chin and it can completely discombobulate you, and you're all over the place, even for 20 seconds or 15 seconds. And in that time, they could damage you, they can hurt you. So we've got to get, it's experience that tells these boxers what to do once they've learned it. But they shouldn't be able to go into the ring, even for sparring, unless they're quite proficient at throwing any particular punch that they need. So there are kind of no more than half a dozen.
So, Frank, that's like individual pain. It's like getting hit with a big shot, right? But I want to ask you, how do you deal with the long period of time when you're competing in a season as a boxer where you're out running and you have to push yourself hard because you know you need to get your fitness level up. You're hungry, you're tired, all these things where you're like potentially saying, I don't want to do this today. And that's not just in boxing. That's anyone who's trying to get fit. They're maybe dieting. I know you speak a lot about older people that are, try and keep yourself active later in life. How do you deal with it mentally when it's getting hard? What have you got strategies? What do you do?
No strategy. I don't think you can, Mike. I think it's again, it goes back to your will. It's willpower, right? And if it's the easiest thing in the world. We've all been there, where you're sitting there and you know in your mind, I should be out there doing something. I promised myself yesterday I would go into the gym. But let's give it a miss. And, I did it for years and years, never went near a gym. Well, partly because young family and I had a busy working life. But now, I'm seeing and I'm hearing in my comments, more and more people are saying, watching you do what you do has inspired me. Some of them even gone as far as to say, you saved my life. And by that, they mean, well, this guy's 79. He's going out and doing it. He's telling me I should get off the couch. And it's simple, right? There are two things here. You've got to exercise within your own limits. You will know your own limits. But once you start, those limits will grow further. And you will be able to do more, right? And I'm not saying everybody is going to be athletic. They're not. But the key thing for people, and I get it all the time from people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s. I mean, I had a guy the other day come on and said, I've been diagnosed with cancer. And he said, I've been very unwell. However, watching your videos has made me get off my backside, join a gym and do some exercise.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Now, that kind of comment is repeated over and over again from people.
That must encourage you as well, Frank.
I was going to say that.
Putting content out for them.
It's fantastic for me. I think, wow, if there's nothing else I do in my life, I'd be able to say some people have gone in exercise and perhaps prolonged their life as a result of it. And I've said to people, and on my videos, get out there and do something. Now, I don't expect everybody, to go and join a gym and pump iron and punch the bag. But I'll tell you what you can do, depending on how you are. You can walk out your front door and walk for half an hour and turn around and walk back for half an hour. And you'll feel on top of the world, because that's probably something you haven't done for years. Right? Depending on your age, your fitness levels and so on, there is stuff that you can do. I do stuff in my back garden. I do exercises, calisthenics, skipping. I do stuff at the beach here in Aberdeen. I go to different places, just to discover. Mm-hmm. I have this thing that anywhere under the sky is your gym. Now, I'm not suggesting people go and be like me and show off in front of people and do stuff at the beach and all that. It's not what it's done for. It's done for the sea air, the ozone, the feeling of being out in the open. No matter how cold you might be, you'll soon warm up. So there's lots of things people can do. And the other key thing, lastly, on this one is you need to retain muscle, right? As soon as your muscle begins to disappear, it's very hard to get up to a good level again. And that's the importance, of basic things like punching the bag, or just calisthenics, doing stuff, I do stuff at home with little 1 kilogram weights, one in each hand. And I do lots of exercise. It's a killer, but it's great. After you've done it, think, wow. So I do 3 sets of 10 so that I do maybe 5 or 6 different exercises with these little dumbbells, and then I repeat them 3 times, and then I lie on the couch exhausted. But it's great fun.
Well, Frank, I really want to drill down on this point, right? What I want to know is, why do you do it? So like because before the social media, you didn't have people giving you comments about how you'd inspired them.
No.
But you'd started training. And what is it? What was it that in your head you said, I need to train for this reason? What was the reason? Why did you say, I have to train?
I think basically, I had trained a bit in my 40s, but I was traveling a lot with my work as a sports writer or sports presenter on TV, and you would miss a week of training, and then this is when the danger hits you. You think, oh, I'll go back next week, and next week comes, you find a reason not to do. Now, that's the key thing. If you can eradicate that, that finding a reason not to go to the gym, it's just sheer laziness half the time. And I was enveloped by laziness for many, many years. And then in my 50s, I guess it was, I started going back, and I went 3 times a week and I trained really hard. I did the full session for me was 50 minutes. But then I started taking more of an interest in the young boxers who are around. Why is nobody teaching them this? Why are they left to hit the bag and nobody's saying, you're doing this incorrectly? And the other question was, are these coaches here capable of teaching? Now, where I was, they weren't. Right, there was a couple here. One with 2 dads, in fact, came along, and suddenly overnight they were coaching. And I'm thinking, well, it's too dangerous to allow that to happen. And I watch young boys being hit and hurt in sparring because of that. Because these so-called coaches would tell them to do stuff that they probably thought was right and they'd seen on the TV or something, but it wasn't. So there's all that. Boxing is such a difficult sport, and that you can get hurt badly if you're not proficient. So why would you not teach the right things to do? I went back simply because I was beginning to feel guilty and thinking, well, I need to keep fit. I'm not fit, and I was fit enough. I don't carry any weight, excess weight. I was fit enough for my age. In fact, fitter than most people my age that were in my work surroundings. However, I felt I needed to be fitter, and the only way I knew how to do it was boxing.
What made you feel guilty?
I don't know. I just used to feel, oh God, I should be doing something. I'm here every night. I'm on my laptop, or I'm watching TV, or I'm, over the piece, over a few years, I've written 3 books. I wrote a play for the theatre, which did well. There was all that going on, and that kind of grabbed me more than physical exercise, because I didn't have to leave my home. I just sat there doing this stuff. But then I began to think, hang on, this isn't good enough. You used to be a boxer. Let's get back and try to do something. The only thing I knew was boxing. And what I wish I'd done years and years ago was to learn yoga. I wish I'd learned yoga, because I think that would have enhanced my fitness and my flexibility, and would have been good for my boxing. Who knows? Maybe one of these days.
Do you ever hear your coach's voice in your head?
What do you mean? I don't know.
When you were boxing,
yeah,
because this is something that happens to me. My coach always had my back. Like he was always my cheerleader. He wanted me to do well,
sure,
for the club.
Yeah,
and I can always see him saying, "Go on, Mike." I can. Yeah. And sometimes when I'm training and it gets really hard, his voice pops into my head and I can hear him. And he's long dead now, but I think that I'm like, gosh, there was a time I was more capable of doing these things. And And it kind of always gives me a second win. And I just wonder, like, do you ever remember things that your coaches said to you when you're training? Does that pop into your head at all?
No, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't. I mean, I had a wonderful guy, a family friend, who coached me and was in my corner for many years. A guy called Jim Monroe, who's sadly died. Jim was a total enthusiast. Jim was one of these guys that tried everything in his life. He played the bagpipes in a pipe band. He played junior football. He played amateur football as well. He boxed. He raced motorbikes. He's one of these guys that was into everything. He lived an extremely full life, and he was the salt of the earth. It was the kind of guy you would depend on fully. You would depend everything on him. And the only thing I remember about him is him knocking the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, say, "Come on, we're going out on the roads." He would be in his car, driving at whatever it was, 10 miles an hour, and I'd be running. In those days, of course, you wore, there was no fancy tracksuits. You wore old stuff and big hobnail boots, and I would pound the streets, and not all the time, but in a lead up to a decent fight, when I was boxing for Scotland, for example. And I didn't, it's like, you know what it's like? It's like being hurt in the fight, or, finishing a fight with an injury that you remember getting for a nanosecond, and then you forget it because the adrenaline's pumping through your body, and you forget that you're hurt, that you're carrying an injury, and it starts hurting when you're finished and you get to the changing room. It's the same thing. You remember it at the minute, but when you're finished, I can't remember a thing he said about, but I do recognise that there are good guys in your corner and not so good ones, and I think that's a key element of boxing, when the corner man has to be in a position to spot your flaws and the flaws of your opponent, and how to capitalise on your opponent's flaws, and not all of them can do that.
The reason I was asking you that is because I think it can really motivate a person to have the memory of someone willing them on to exercise and to train. And I often think, because I did get quite out of shape. Not that I'm in great shape, Frank, but
you've got to do it. What are you talking about?
I'll tell you about that in a minute. So I often think my coach was Doug Ford, and I often think, what would Doug think about this? He would not be very happy, He'd be saying, "Come on, Mike, get yourself going." The triathlon. So, Frank, this is one of the things. And you said you've motivated people. You'd motivated me. Wow. Because when we were talking, you said about when you'd started training again, and I'm a boxer. I should have been. This is what you were thinking. You're like, why am I not exercising? I've got it in me. I have the capacity. And when I was speaking to you, I thought, Frank started training again at 50. I got no excuse. I'm younger. I should start training, and I've started training again 6 months in. I've lost 10 kilos, and I've got a triathlon coming up next month. So it'll be the first triathlon I've ever done.
So the triathlon is swimming, cycling, and running.
Yeah, in that order.
Yeah. See, I think people who do that are crazy. I don't know. I ran a marathon once when I was 37, and it was on the telly and all that. And Alan Saunders, God rest his soul, who was a colleague of mine, he interviewed him, and the first thing he said was, "Well done. Would you do it again?" And I said, "Not in a million years, But I think what you're doing is phenomenal. It reminds me of the guys I knew who did the Highland Cross. Now, they ran for, I think, 30 miles over very rugged terrain, way up in the Highlands, and then they cycled 20 miles. So it was across Scotland at the top.
Yeah, that's tough. That's very tough.
Yeah, but what you're doing is, I don't know, where do you get the energy?
Well, it's just like you were saying, when I started training again, I found it really hard. I couldn't run to the end of the road. You know, I started running. Now I've run a marathon. I've run half marathons. I used to run a lot. Had boxing matches.
Yes.
And I've done a lot of sports. And I started running. I couldn't get to the end of the road. And I thought, gosh, right, I'm going to set the goal here of running around the block, okay, which is just under a mile. So I did a bit like a walk, run a bit, walk a bit, run a bit, to the point that I could run the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then I installed a program on my phone. It was a couch to 5K type program. And I completed that. And then when I completed it, I thought, no, I need another goal because I'll fall off. I'll say, well, there's not a reason to train now. Yeah. So I entered this triathlon. I started going to the club, and of course, they train you much harder they train me harder than I would train on my own. You know, they give you drills that are organized in a way that it makes it tough for you, you know? So, and when I complete the triathlon, I'll probably be one of these people that says, right now, I need to do an Ironman or something, you know, I need to take it to the next level.
Well, you have just articulated the messages, you know, that I try to put out. But what you've taken to the extreme, just calm down. Yeah, you know, I'm talking about just going to the gym and punching the bag. But I think that's fantastic, Mike. I'm really chuffed for you. And I mean,
thank you.
Keep going.
I think when I'm training, I mean, this morning I went running, and doubt was creeping into my head when I was running. Yeah. You know, I was running, and I thought, oh, this is hard. You know, I'm tired because I've been trying to lose weight as well. So I'm not eating it as much.
Yeah. You
know, probably eating what's a normal diet, but doing the training on top. So less calories than, not that calorie count, but as I was going round, the doubt crept into my head while I was running. And then I said to myself, what are you doing? You know, you've fought men in a boxing ring.
Yeah.
What you only have to run another half mile, you know? Like, this is so much easier than, really, triathlon is so much easier than boxing.
No.
It is so much easier.
Well, it's easier than you don't get hit in the face, but...
Exactly.
But apart from that, you see, that's interesting. I hated running. I hated doing road work. And I hated training for the marathon that I did. On the basis of just what you were saying, the doubts that creep into your mind. But not only that, all the kind of things. So sometimes it was great, very rarely. Sometimes you would work things out that were in your brain, maybe from work, and you had a problem or issues or anything. And when you thought of these things, sometimes you think, oh, I'm nearly finished, you know, this run, a 12-mile run or whatever it was. But generally speaking, I found it really difficult to shake off this, oh God, I hate this, you know. This sat in my mind for miles and miles, and I found it really hard to shake off. So what you're doing is, you seem to have trained your mind to kind of overcome that kind of thinking.
Yeah, it's why I was kind of asking you all about that, you know, like, I know I'm not the only one. I think everybody must let doubt creep into their head when they're training. I mean, you know what I actually thought when I was running as well today was, I don't feel like this, right? But if I was actually honest, I could probably break in a sprint and sprint to the end of the road, and I would feel horrendous, but I could do it.
Yeah.
And then I said, well, okay, so just jog it, because you can do it.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, it's not beyond you to do it. You're just being stupid. You're being silly, you know. Just get on with it.
Well, it's kind of like being in the ring, isn't it? You've experienced it many times. And maybe it's tough, and it's hard, and you're exhausted, and you've taken a couple of punches. You're thinking, oh my God, I'm tired. I'm dying for this final bell to go. This is where you've got to lift yourself. And it's just what you were speaking about there. You just got to go, you know, up another gear and say, right, I can do this. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you just want to, you know, hang on, or, you know, or just say, turn to the timekeeper and say, when the hell are you going to ring that bell, for goodness sake?
I've often heard it said that you don't know how long 3 minutes is until you've been in a boxing ring.
That's a good point. That's a good one. I was always, you know, that's interesting, because after it, and having done TV work for 25 or more years, I could time things. Now, you know, I could time a 30-minute script, or a 30-second script or a minute script. I could, just by writing it, and I could say that's 30 seconds, and it's the same with the 3-minute round. I can tell when it's 3 minutes. You don't yet. It's kind of built into it because that's the way you grew up.
Frank, when I was boxing at Arbroath, Doug Ford, the coach, he always used to guess. So it was 2-minute rounds. You do 4 twos in the amateurs at this point. And Doug would always just estimate what a 2-minute round was for sparring, right? And I tell you, some of these sparring rounds would be 5 minutes long, right? And I said to him, Doug, could we get one of those electric timers that beeps? So why do you need that for? Just do 2-minute rounds. You don't need a timer for it, And you'd be down there. Say on this occasion, you'd be sparring with the Scottish super heavyweight champion, right? And you're taking a beating. It's not, it's a long 2-minute race, getting into 5 minutes. And you're like, Dougie, surely, come on, that's 2 minutes. You'd be wondering when this was going to end. I persuaded him. We managed to get one of those little electric timers. Thank goodness.
Yeah, they never existed in my day.
No, I know. You wouldn't get that. So,
this guy had a stopwatch. That was it.
Like, speaking of clubs, Frank, I saw Johnny Nelson say that he was going to be addressing the government on grassroots boxing. He was going to be talking to them about how the government can support clubs, young fighters. What do you think would be the route that they should take? How would the government intervene and help clubs, and what would be a beneficial way for clubs to approach the government?
Well, I think that let's start at the end, if you like, because if there was government funding or local authority funding into boxing clubs, not just boxing clubs, it could be other sports. Not everybody's interested in boxing. However, there is an argument that says that, certainly going back through the generations, that the people who joined boxing clubs came from underprivileged areas, generally speaking.
I think that's still the case.
Yeah. Well, so these underprivileged areas have more issues than the middle classes and the middle class areas have. And that's because of a variety of reasons. Parents unemployed, single parents, lots of that. I think now the divorce/separation figure is like 50% in the UK. So you've got kids who are growing up, and this is important. Young boys especially growing up without a father figure in their lives. So they're at home with a single mum, and she's maybe struggling with money, with how to feed the kids, and the kids are difficult, and schooling issues. There are other statistics which tell us that here in the UK, more and more young boys are not going to school. They're just not turning up, and they'd rather do something else. They'll go away together in groups and so on. And so you've got this kind of whole generation, or generations, growing up without any great leadership. Now, that leadership could exist in a boxing club. So if you're in government and you're looking at boxing clubs and you're going round them, and this is what they need to do. You need to go around boxing clubs if you're a government minister and see for yourself the work that goes on. And you've got, thousands and thousands of young people, boys and girls now, in boxing clubs doing something meaningful and feeling part of a boxing family or a boxing community. And what are you doing? You're breeding not just champions, you're breeding better citizens, people who will be able to contribute to their own communities as they grow older, instead of going into a life of petty crime. Now, only the other day, the statistics for England and Wales, I don't know what they are for Scotland, for England and Wales, tell us there are 150 stabbings every day. Right. So if you've got that level of knife crime, you've got a mega problem. And the government needs to intervene in some way. I would contend one of the ways is to pour money into setting up more and more boxing clubs. These poor boxing clubs are knocking on doors and saying to companies and individuals, will you donate? Will you sponsor? Will you help us financially? Now, that didn't exist in my day growing up. You got guys like my dad who would open a boxing club and they would get a couple of coaches in and they would get kids off the streets. Now, occasionally we would have the boys in blue would come round and say, oh, we're looking for A, B, and C. Are they here tonight? Yeah, they're here. Why? What's the problem? My dad would always have their back. What's the problem? Oh, we've had a report that they were taking petrol caps off the car and throwing them over walls and all that kind of petty stuff, right? That petty stuff could lead on to other stuff. And they get into, boys at 14, 15, 16, they get, they can join, they can be part of groups which are not good. They're negative. And they feel that they have to do as their peers, follow their peers, as the peers do. And so boxing clubs, Johnny Nelson's quite right to go and lobby for this. When Labour government took over, I immediately wrote to Lord Timpson, who was appointed ministers for prisons in the Justice Department. And he had a track record of employing in his shoe repair and key cutting businesses, a big chain right across the UK, of course. He had a track record of employing former prisoners to help them, to rehabilitate them. And I said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we had a pilot program among young offenders and young offenders institutions and set up a little gym in one of these places with some punch bags, no boxing ring, just some punch bags, skipping ropes, that kind of thing. And we taught them how to box. How many of those might leave prison when their time is up and go and join their local boxing club?
Yeah, because, Frank, it's much better if they get addicted to sport than they get addicted to a drug.
Yep.
And I think sport can be addictive in a good way, in a positive way.
You're absolutely right. And you get these guys who can change their life, turn their lives around through boxing, simply by recognising, I'm good at this. Here's the other key thing, Mike. You have to have guys who are running the club, trainers or club officials, who are encouraging, who are telling kids, you're doing really well, but I think you could do better, and telling them how to do it better. So there's all that is kind of, it goes into the mix of making better citizens. Okay, if they don't become champions, at least during their time, they will enjoy doing what they're doing. They will feel part of a family. They'll be ecstatic with what they can do, and they will forget their troubles in life, because lots of kids coming from difficult backgrounds through no fault of their own can fall off the cliff, and that's sad to see.
If the government did intervene and put more funding, where should they put it? I mean, do you think it should be facilities or training coaches or
I think
some way for kids to access equipment if they needed to?
Yeah, I think, all of that and more. I think the key thing is that they've got to give the boxing clubs money, because it shouldn't be that the boxing clubs have got to go out with the begging bowl and rely on sponsorship if they can get it, and they're running raffles and they're getting their members to go and try and raise money through sponsored runs and all that stuff. We shouldn't have to do that.
Actually, Frank, it seems to me that the government or the lottery, who've been providing funding for boxing, right?
Yes.
For them, it's all about a gold medal in the Olympics. Is this going to lead to a gold medal? It's not about getting 50 and 60-year-old people active again. It's not about how many young people can we attract into a better lifestyle. It seems to me that it's about can we focus this in all into like a little pyramid that arrives at a gold medal
Yeah.
in the Olympics?
Yes.
And maybe a change of approach is
Yeah.
needed.
But totally, I couldn't agree more with you, because that's not the end for me. I mean, grassroots boxing is not about developing Olympic champions. It's about developing good people, better young people. And if that's a bonus thing, as they say, if they become champions, fantastic. And they would deserve it, because they have a talent which is better than their peers. But it doesn't mean to say that their peers in that particular boxing club are poorer people or worse people than they are. We're all the same. We're all boxers. Some are better. It's like any sport. Some are champions. Some are better. Some are not so good. But we're all there to enjoy it. And the thing about you're absolutely right. I mean, I have long had this argument with the money that's poured into staging Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, all that stuff. In my view, especially today, when the poverty across the world is rife, and people are crying out for help, and we're thinking about spending billions of pounds and dollars on major sporting events. And I don't see that. I think we've lost sight of what we're here put on earth for.
I bet just focusing all that money on that one thing. See if they spread it out and they did think about grassroots sport. I bet you there would be a net gain, a massive net gain for the government, right? Where if they had the choice of get someone fit in a boxing club, pay the money to get them fit, improve their life. Maybe it's even not just boxing, other sports, right? Or the other option would be a prisoner or type 2 diabetes that you're treating in a hospital. What's that going to cost the government? And I think, getting young people and giving them a purpose and a sport and an active lifestyle and role models. Yeah. It doesn't cost much.
No, but it's an obvious solution. And I do not understand why all it needs is one guy at a high level at government. If you get beyond the civil servants who stop these requests and suggestions and proposals going to the ministerial level, if you get beyond them and get hold of a minister who believes in what we're saying, then you might see a difference. Or, you're absolutely right. It would cut petty crime and crime right across the board if people were doing something meaningful, something useful, something that was important in their lives. Why do they get into crime? Because they've got nothing else in their lives, but they join the gangs to go out with knives, to go out robbing and shoplifting and all that stuff that goes on now. More and more, this country's going to wreck and ruin because of that, I think. So we're in a bit of a lawless situation, and I think that sport in general and boxing in particular can help bring down the levels of crime in the country. I think we'd be in a much better place if we were to do that.
Well, so on that note, Frank, I'm going to land the plane. I'm going to ask you just a couple more things.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, because you've got your own gloves now.
Yes.
How did that start? What's the purpose of the gloves?
If you look back over the generations of boxers, they all wore bag mitts when punching the bag. Now, if I were to say that to a young boxer today, bag mitts, they probably wouldn't know what I was talking about. But basically, they were not very well padded gloves, mitts. But the key thing was the flexible thumb, right? No padding, a leather thumb, which you could wrap round the fist and clench a fist. Now, unfortunately, that all went by the board. I think I was trying to figure it out probably about 15 years ago, when all these young boxers started appearing with sparring gloves in the gym and wearing them on the punch bag. And I thought, well, these look good. They're spectacular looking. However, when you try them on, you think, hang on, I can't close my fist. I couldn't, I tried it a company sent me some gloves, and I couldn't clench my fist. Now, I couldn't close my fist, so I knew that if I was punching the bag, I would hurt my hand. But worse than that, the thumb had a heavily padded, but it had a little piece of elastic which was attached to the main part of the glove. So the fist was like this. And I'm thinking, how can you punch when you've got that? What you do notice now is that what we used to call slapping, punching with the inside of the glove and the bottom part of the finger, which was illegal in boxing, now it's rife. Even at the top level, you can see people throwing hooks and they're landing with the inside of the glove rather than the knuckle part. So I brought out the Noble Art mitts, and I think, okay, what if we made them nice, better padded, 8 ounces, but retained the non-padded thumb, which means that it can still clench a fist, wrap that thumb right round the fist, and they would have greater satisfaction in punching the bag. Right. What we find is young boxers can't take to that because they're not used to it. They've been introduced to something which was completely foreign to boxing in the generations gone by. When Joe Louis, Marciano, the great middleweights, Sugar Ray Robinson, all the great fighters, Willie Pep, all wore bag mitts because it allowed them to punch properly. Now what we're seeing is an eradication of that. So, but what I'm finding, Mike, is this. I'm finding that people in their 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond who want to go to the boxing gym and who do attend an amateur boxing club are enjoying their experience more in punching the bag because they're wearing these bag mitts that I've produced. It's enhanced their satisfaction. They keep telling me that all the time.
Well, I often wonder, Frank, if because my gloves were like that, and I wonder if the hand problems I had were because I couldn't make a solid, complete fist. And if I look at the gloves I used to use, I can see that my thumbs almost formed this bit in the leather where it's trying to poke through to form a fist because I was trying to force it.
Yeah.
You know? So
yeah.
I really like that you've gone for 8 ounces because that's the weight of a professional fighting glove. So you're going to feel like you're a professional hitting the
Not
bag.
anymore. Of course, when we remember the days of, Frank Bruno, and not so much Frank Bruno, but Henry Cooper, certainly, heavyweight champion of Great Britain. All these heavyweights, all the weights, wore 8-ounce gloves. Now they're wearing, in the 10 ounces, 12 ounces, depending on the weight category. And they're lovely looking things, but they're rigid. You cannot actually mould your hand properly. And if you're speaking about hurting your hands, that's probably why.
I would have thought so.
Yeah, if you can't punch with the knuckle part of the glove, you're not doing it properly. So that's why the Noble Art bag mitts are important. If you want to have a good experience, satisfactory experience, punching the bag, you need to be able to clench your fist. And that's what they do. They allow you to do that.
Brilliant. Where can they get them, Frank?
Well, they're available at thenobleart.shop, which will take you directly to the shop, and you can get them there. In fact, we've got some beautiful bag mitts in black and vintage brown, and we've got some burgundy ones coming as well. And very shortly, the most exquisite kind of grey, green, olive colour. They're very, very smart looking. They're really brilliant. But more importantly, you'll enjoy it because you'll be able to punch the bag properly, and you'll finish your session without sore fingers.
I'm really looking forward to seeing them, and I think we can link that below the video as well. So if anyone's in the market for gloves, there will be linked below and in the little carousel that YouTube put up below as well. Frank, it's such a pleasure. It's always a pleasure when we chat. So we'll have to do it again sometime soon.
Mike, always enjoy talking to you, especially about boxing. Let's do it again soon. Thank you.